The strategy to succeed in a deflationary environment is different than the strategy to succeed in an inflationary environment, right? Because when you're worried just about inflation, really what you want to be doing is you want to be holding hard assets like real estate and gold and maybe crypto and, some other things of that nature, right? Because when inflation goes up, the house, that's one of the reasons, like, these houses will go up with inflation. They're hard assets. They have like that hard value to them. So they're going to follow that, right? They're going to follow the trend of inflation. With deflation, obviously, that means money comes out of the money supply, out of circulation, and assets will drop. We're going to have austerity. We're going to have, just a depression, so to speak. That would be what a deflationary environment would look like. It would look like 2008 for a prolonged period of time. It would look like, the Great Depression. It would look like, times of hardship and challenge like that. Hey, what's going on, cash flow hackers? It's Chris with Life 180. And for this video, we're going to be talking about real estate markets, the stock markets, the economy, the Federal Reserve, what is going on in this world right now when it comes to money, when it comes to inflation, when it comes to interest rates, when it comes to the values of these assets, whether it's the stock market or real estate or, the cost of cars, like all this stuff that's going on that just seems totally disjointed from reality, right? And I think most people that I talk to are not doing better off. Yet we have this inflationary environment that's kind of getting out of control. Buyers are getting priced out of the housing market. I live here in Phoenix. It's one of the worst markets, or I guess depending on what side of the aisle you stand on, right? Like, as a home owner, it's a great place to be because you're getting massive appreciation in your house. It's a total buyers or a total sellers market right now because they can make money hand over fist, and buyers are fighting and putting bids on, and literally sometimes north of 20 bids going for hundreds of thousands of dollars over asking price for houses that won't even meet appraisal, right? And so, like, the question is, what's going on here? Why is this happening? What is 2022 possibly going to look like here as we move forward? And I think it's really important because, hey, listen, I'm actually talking with my wife about this right now, and we have a house that we bought a couple years ago. Actually, we timed it just right, coincidentally and fortunately. Right before COVID, we moved into to our new house, and it was this wonderful location on a cul-de-sac on a corner golf course lot with a pool, and it's fantastic. That house, our house, has literally gone up by almost 100%, probably 40% in 2 years, right, since we've been here, and so I'm going to use my example as a scenario, and we have some kind of balls that are up in the air as far as decisions we're going to make. But I think this scenario is something that this train of thought is something that I think a lot of people should consider. So what we're doing here is we're sitting here looking at the money that we have in equity in the house, and we're looking at the economy. And so before I get into any details of what I'm thinking about for myself personally, let's talk about what's going on in the economy as a whole, right? So we have the government that has trillions and trillions of dollars in debt and unfunded liabilities, right? We're nearing $30 trillion in debt. We're over, I think, almost $200 trillion in unfunded liabilities. Things are just out of whack when it comes to the debt. We're in a really, really unhealthy position as a nation, right, for the United States. I don't know about Canada, but I know that the United States is way out of whack when it comes to the health of the financial system and how solvent they can be. Now, there's a lot of fear going on right now, and this is where I start to get torn on what I would be doing for myself. And one of the things that I always tell people is I'm a big fan of building systems and setting yourself up financially so you're going to win either way, right? Like, and that's one of the things I want to cover here. But before you can even go there, we have to be thinking about what is going on in this world and what are the factors that are going to affect what direction things are going to go economically, and then the trickle down effect to how that's going to actually impact you in your personal financial world, right? And so there's the first thing that I would talk about here is the fact that Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve right now, is talking about the fact that they may be needing to make emergency rate hikes. And over the next couple months, they're talking about, they keep honestly they keep throwing out all sorts of different numbers. And the reason I believe that they're throwing out all sorts of random numbers and different numbers, and they keep changing literally on a week by week basis, is because they're being really reactive, and they realize that, Peter Schiff talks about this all the time. If you don't watch Peter Schiff, you should watch him. He's amazing. But he talks about this all the time, and he talks about the fact that they're out of ammunition, right? We have a situation where inflation right now is 7.5%. But the crazy part is inflation, if you utilize the calculations from the 1970s, inflation would be over 15%. So we're literally in the worst inflationary environment that we've ever been in right now. And so if you understand Keynesian economics, we are in the perfect storm of Keynesian economics as far as the downside potential of it, because the overall principle of Keynesian economics was that we had an elastic currency, right? Meaning when interest rates got bad, when inflation got high, bad, right? The idea was the only way inflation got high was because the economy was booming, right? And because if we stimulate the economy, as the economy gets booming, inflation may get out of control, so that because the economy is booming, we can then raise interest rates, pull money out of the money supply, out of circulation, and that will control inflation, pull things back down to earth. And philosophically, that works as long as the economy is going well and can sustain rate hikes, right? Because that will have a negative impact in the economy. So right now, it's crazy because if you go back to 1979, Paul Volcker raised rates from 6% to 19% virtually overnight, right? So it's a 13% rate hike because of the fact that interest rates were out of control. Now, principally speaking, if you understand this, we're at 7.5% inflation. Let's just use today's numbers and not go into the fact that it's actually worse than it seems, but let's just use 7.5%. Just with those numbers, the way that it works is in order to get that under control, the Federal Reserve needs to raise the federal funds rate to at least 7.5% to pull money out of circulation and to incentivize people to save and put that incentive back in the marketplace, right? And so what that would do is it would contract the economy. But as we know, rising interest rates, that would bump mortgage rates up into the probably 9 to 10% range, and that would crash the stock market. It would crash the real estate market, and so therefore the government is not able to do that, right? So we're not able to raise interest rates the way we need to because the economy, guess what? It's not booming. It's an economy built on sand, right? And a foundation of sand. And so when we look at that, now we tack on top of it the fact that we have $30 trillion in debt. And most people don't realize that we have this $30 trillion of debt almost, and that debt is mostly short-term debt. So what happens is if we were to raise the federal funds rate to 5%, that's almost $1.5 trillion a year just in interest payments to sustain that debt, to service that debt. Right? So $1.5 trillion. So the government, everybody is sitting here talking about like, oh, the Fed's going to raise rates. Okay, they have to, first of all, but I guess secondly, they can't raise rates enough to actually do what it needs to do. So it's not going to solve the problem of inflation, first of all. Secondly, if they did, it would crash the market. And thirdly, they can't afford to raise rates at all virtually not even because of the economy, not because of the health of the economy, not because of what they're worried about it's going to do to the markets, whether the stock or real estate markets or anything of that nature. They're worried about being able to service that debt and what it will do as you know, on our books from a government perspective to be able to service that debt. We're going to have bigger deficits annually every single year as interest rates have to go up because of the fact that most of that debt is short term. And listen, this is what happens when you kick the can down the road right now. And you know, there's two polar opposite minds that I listen to that I think are really important. One of them is Harry Dent and one of them is Peter Schiff. Now I listen to a lot of other people too, but these guys kind of fall on two sides of the pendulum, right? Like Harry Dent believes deflation is going to be coming and Peter Schiff believes that we're going to have massive inflation, right? And so the reason I bring that up is because they're polar opposite sides of the pendulum, right? And the strategy to succeed in a deflationary environment is different than the strategy to succeed in an inflationary environment, right? Because when you're worried just about inflation, really what you want to be doing is you want to be holding hard assets like real estate and gold and maybe crypto and, some other things of that nature, right? Because when inflation goes up, the house, that's one of the reasons, like, these houses will go up with inflation. They're hard assets. They have like that hard value to them. So they're going to follow that, right? They're going to follow the trend of inflation. With deflation, obviously, that means money comes out of the money supply, out of circulation, and assets will drop. We're going to have austerity. We're going to have, just a depression, so to speak. That would be what a deflationary environment would look like. It would look like 2008 for a prolonged period of time. It would look like, the Great Depression. It would look like, times of hardship and challenge like that. And so the bottom line is, I don't know what's going to happen, right? Nobody does. But I do believe, as I'm looking at this and looking at for myself now, because my wife and I have a lot of equity sitting in our house, just like I think probably a lot of people watching this video. And so I'm sitting here going, what is the best thing for us to do? Because I love my house. I love where we live. I'm a big believer you should never make emotional decisions when it comes to your house. Yes, I understand that where you live, your personal residence is it's a lifestyle decision. But like, when you look at the amount of money that people are sitting on right now, it's just, you have to consider what are the best things long-term for you to get where you want to go, and what are the risks? Because like right now, all the equity that most Americans are sitting on with their home equity in their house, they are taking all the risk. You are taking on all the risk of that personally for yourself. Now, obviously, there are different ways that you can handle that. You can get a home equity line of credit, and then you can just access money that way and get access to a line of credit through your house. But the thing to understand there is that if we do go the other direction, if the market contracts, right, and starts going negative, what's going to happen is a lot of those home equity lines of credits are going to be frozen, right? Like, so if you haven't used it yet, which is ultimately what you should be doing, right? Like, you should be waiting and using it potentially, or utilizing it for cash flow properties, one or the other, right? Like, it's depending on how opportunistic and how you want to time that out. But I got to tell you, once again, this is not personal advice. This is not me telling you should go out and do something. I'm simply telling you what I'm thinking about doing. And what that is basically, and once again, I haven't made any decisions on this from a finality perspective, but looking at the fact that if we took into consideration, let's just say we had $500,000 in equity sitting in the house, of growth that was sitting in the house. We have the option of, like I said, getting a home equity line of credit. And if I got a home equity line of credit right now, I could go out and, look for opportunity. I could borrow against that line of credit. I could get cash flow properties. I could buy some turnkey stuff. I could do a lot of things with it in that regard. Or I could sell this house, right? And I could cash out. But the problem with that is, if I sell, then I have to live somewhere else, right? And when you look around in a lot of markets, a lot of the cities in this country, rental rates have gone through the roof. And so as I've been looking around with my wife at the costs of extra rent in the market right now, we're looking, it would cost us about anywhere from $12,000 to $18,000 extra per year to live. So now what I have to look at is like, okay, let's say worst case scenario, it costs me $36,000, to do this. Well, am I willing to pay a $36,000 premium over the next 2 years to be able to regain and completely control $500,000 of capital in this scenario, right? That would be the variables that I'm trying to consider. And if the answer is yes, then obviously we can sell the house. And I'm a believer personally that in the next 2 years, the market has to come down. We're either going to have massive inflation problems, or we're going to have a contraction in the market. It's going to be one or the other. We can't just keep, sustaining this middle ground right now without it getting either out of control one direction or actually doing what needs to happen to pull things pull back on the reins and slow everything down. But if we slow this economy down, it's going to crash. It's just, that's my belief. And so when we look at those options, I'm just looking at it as like, I could pay that $36,000 to gain control of that $500,000. And then I truly control that money, right? Because if I have the home equity line of credit, I never really truly control that, because it could freeze that on me at any point in time. And when I need it the most is likely when it's going to be frozen on me, right? So there's an opportunity cost that would go along with that line of credit potentially, right? So that's really, really important to understand. Third option is I could just stay in my house, right? Like we could just stay here and just say, listen, we believe inflation's going to keep going. We believe that, this market is going to continue to grow. Zillow just put a thing. I'm looking at it on my computer screen right here. Zillow says that home prices are set to spike, according to them. That in this article they just released on February 17th, 2022 here, so just a couple days ago, on Fortune magazine, they think housing prices are going to spike by 22% again this year, right? So if that's the case, by me selling this house, I would be walking away from an extra $200,000 of growth, right? So that's a risk that I have to look at. So the question there becomes, what are my options? What do I want to do? So what I'm looking at from the perspective of is, how can I regain that control, that capital, and what would I do with that? So for me, Grant Cardone says it all the time: rent where you live and own rental properties. And the reason that you want to rent where you live and own rental properties is because renting where you live gives you a lot of flexibility, nimbleness, ability to just move about the cabin, right? And adjust based on different economic environments, right? And when you own rental properties, you're taking advantage of the appreciation in the marketplace. You have renters paying your mortgage down. You have cash flow from the properties. You need to make sure that you own properties in the right areas, that even if the market goes down, even if the values go down, rental rates will be able to sustain. There were places in the United States in 2008 and 9 that got just massacred from a home value perspective. But rents, houses went down 50 to 70%, but rents sustained, the cash flow for the properties, right? So that's something that you really, really need to consider is that going to work out for you? And so, that's one of the things that we're considering is, if we were to take this out, we would go rent somewhere, but we would buy rental properties with that money. And that is kind of the cash flow hacking way. And, if you haven't got a copy of this book, I would go down below in the link below and check it out. You can get a free copy. You can go to Amazon and pay $20 for it, or you can go to cashflowhackingbook.com and get a free copy. All I ask you to do is pay $8.95 for shipping and handling to cover that, to cover our cost to get that to you. But aside from that, this is the thing that I think is, I guess, plaguing most people in the United States right now, and probably Canada as well. But plaguing their thoughts right now is like, what do I do? How do I handle this? And, you're torn between the opportunity, of capitalizing on this growth, and you want to be opportunistic and you want to set yourself up for that. And you're torn about the security of just keeping, whatever property that you have and just letting it ride and kind of seeing how it plays out. So the bottom line at the end of the day is that there's no right answer to this. There just isn't. You have to look at all the moving parts. You have to look at, what are you going to do with that money when you take it out? So I could tell you, from my perspective, what would happen is money would come out. If we go this direction, money would come out. It would go through a whole life insurance policy. We would bank it there. We would then borrow against that through a cash value line of credit. We would then get rental properties. I've already done the math on what it could be right now. We could actually turn more cash flow than we're paying for the mortgage, and that would cover our rent alone. So from that perspective alone, from a lifestyle perspective, it's a no-brainer, because we could basically live for free, and then we still have the upside appreciation potential of the other rental properties that we buy. Now, because obviously we lose the appreciation ability in our primary home, but that appreciation potential would shift over to the investment properties that we were to buy, right? And so those are just things to consider. Once again, this is a big time emotional decision for a lot of people. If you're married, it gets even more emotional. If you have kids, it's even more emotional, because there's so many variables, like what school districts are you in? How does your spouse feel about the home that you live in? What are your goals? And so what I would do is I would take a step back and I would say, what are our 5-year goals? What do we want life to look like 5 years from now? And how can we leverage everything in our life to get us to where we want to go? And the answer is going to be different for everybody. And so I'm going to be doing more videos on this as 2022 develops, because I'm a big believer right now. Like I said at the beginning, the government cannot just raise rates. And so I'm not going to be making any decisions, I don't think, for the next couple months. And the reason for that is because of the fact that I want to see how things play out. It is an election year. It's a midterm elections this year. So, there's a train of thought that a lot of people are thinking that they're not going to raise rates, because if they do raise rates, it's going to just hurt the Democrats. Quite frankly, it's going to hurt the Democrats who are in office right now, because they have control of the House, the Senate, and they have the presidency, right? So like it always, the party that has control always stands the most to lose in an economy when it struggles. So they're going to do everything they can, in my opinion, to keep things going through November. And so I'm not sure what things are going to look like till then. And once again, this is speculative on my part, just taking a look at what could possibly happen. But when you look at history and when you look at what they do during election years and how monetary policy is typically run, quite frankly, they're damned if they do and damned if they don't right now. And so what I do love about the idea, if you are going to be preparing for this, I love the idea of putting your money in a whole life policy as a holding vehicle, as a storage tank for that capital, for your wealth preservation, because of the fact that if you just took that money and you put it in a savings account, you're going to be losing money to inflation. And what you do when you put it in a whole life policy is, because it's tied to the fixed market, as if inflation keeps going up, what's going to happen is the fixed market performance is going to keep going up. And so as that happens, dividends will go up with whole life insurance as well. That's what happened in the 70s and 80s. Dividend rates were 14, 15%. And so when that's, the environment that we're in, that's why I always say whole life is a hedge long-term to inflation. Now, there's going to be a little bit of a tail on it, because there's going to take a year or two to catch up while the dividend rates get increased for these companies. But as far as like a storage of value for your money long-term, there's not much of a better storage tank from that perspective than whole life insurance. So if you're interested, if you're concerned, if you have any questions around any of this and you'd like to talk to somebody from Life 180, go ahead and there's a link down below. You can click on it, schedule a time, have a conversation, go to life180.com, set up an appointment with somebody, and that's it. So if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, hit the bell, that way you get notified every time I launch a new video, because I'm going to be doing a lot of videos on this topic as the year goes on. I'm going to be doing some case studies, sharing stories from people that I know are going through this. I've been having a lot of conversations. I'm going to be getting Mike Wolf on here to talk about his opinion on the real estate market. He's been a real estate expert for 33 years. And so it's just amazing stuff. So make sure you subscribe, make sure you hit that bell so you're notified. And if you haven't already, please hit that like button. And that's it for this video. Have a blessed, inspirational day, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.